I'm going to be presenting tonight on Scrums. They're a pretty polarising part of the game. Some people love them, some people hate them. I, for one, really enjoy Scrums. I think they're a really good challenge for referees. I think they're really important. I think if you ask guys and girls from community level right up until high performance, and you ask them about some of the toughest games they've had or the toughest days at the office they've had, I'd say a good portion of those would have involved tough scrum days. So they're pretty important to get right. The counter to that is if you invest time in setting up scrums, and learning about scrums and understanding what to look for, it can make your job a lot easier.
Just excuse me interrupting, just on that theme of setup,
Yep.
because that's very important. Is the light right for everybody to see this now?
Well, it could be down a little bit.
Do you want the lights off? Yes, you want them off? Okay. Better?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Josh. So setup, obviously very important. If you take a guy like Ben Skeen, when he was refereeing, he used to say, tidy scrums, tidy game. And that really reflects, I guess, how important it is to make sure you nail your scrums. Before I go on, we're going to talk about, I think there are 4 things that this presentation goes through. I think if you have any questions, by all means, just stick your hand up and hopefully we can address it there and then. But it's useful for us to have a bit of a think about what the purpose of a scrum is. So if we think about when we have scrums, what's the purpose of a scrum for teams? We always want to think about what players are trying to achieve. What are teams trying to achieve with a scrum?
Restart play.
Ball in, ball out, restart, yep. So for some teams, ball in, ball out, restart play, that's all they're looking to achieve from a scrum. Not every team treats scrums like that. Anything else? Dominance, yep. Scrum for a penalty, yep. So scrumming for an outcome, or to set a platform to kind of achieve dominance, to set the platform by which they play their whole game. So, I understand that for a lot of us, the kind of pictures that we see at scrum time can be different based on the level of rugby we're refereeing, but to be completely honest, the principles and the kind of pictures you're looking for are exactly the same. Okay, so the overarching mentality towards scrums is exactly the same. So that's useful for us to bear in mind, because when we're refereeing, we should understand that for some teams they're looking to lay a platform, they're looking to assert dominance, and we have to be aware of that, so that when they're successful in getting dominance, we're rewarding that. Okay? So, a question here, what are the key parts of the scrum that we need to discuss? Any ideas?
Binding.
What's that? Stability.
Binding.
Get it set up right at the beginning.
Yeah.
So there should be pre-engaged,
Yeah, so setup, I'll use setup as one. Setup, so that's everything that encompasses binding, stability, things like that, actually setting the scrum up from the moment you have a knock on through to, you say set. What else is there? Yep. Yeah. You do, so you've got your numbers.
engagement.
Pre-engage, again, still part of the setup.
The engagement, the actual engagement, when you bring them together.
Yep. Yeah, so I'd probably say that's part of the set.
Okay.
Yep. So there's that setup piece.
Your calls?
Your calls.
Binding,
Well, yep. So that's again part of your setup. But when I say calls, what about decisions? Right, that's a pretty big part of it. Once you've set your scrum up, you've got the ball in, that's when you get called on to make a decision. So there's a setup, there are the decisions.
The feet.
The feet, yep. Again, part of that, part of that decision-making setup process. When does a scrum, or when does your scrum process start?
You make the mark.
You make the mark?
Pre-match.
Pre-match. Yeah. Pat Drum knows what he's talking about, doesn't he? Hey, pre-match. Okay, pre-match is actually really important. That's the first interaction you have with front rowers around scrum time and your expectations. Pre-match is very, very important. I'll talk about that in a bit. And then there's a fourth piece there around AR support. And I think really relevant for us, whether you're using ARs and knowing how you want to use your ARs, but also when you're ARing. So I understand the vast majority of us don't have ARs, and that's fine, but at some stage during the season you'll probably get called on to AR. So really important that you know what you're looking for, you know what the pictures are, and you know how you can add value. Okay? So there we go, we've got our pre-match, our setup, decision making, and your AR support. Pre-match. So like I said, this is the first time that you engage with the front rowers, and it can be really important. For us as referees, I know there's a feeling, and often it's true, again from, you know, at all levels of the game, that the front rowers don't want to be there. Often they don't. There's a perception that they're not listening, and often they're not. But I guess for me, if I think about how I use my pre-match, that's kind of a separate point, a separate issue, because the pre-match as a referee is important for us regardless. So those who know me know I'm a lawyer by trade, and so for me, the way I rationalise it is that my pre-match is when I decide what I'm going to contract into with the front rowers. Right? It's me setting standards with them so that they know that if they don't do something, that I can always fall back on what I said to them in the pre-match. Okay, so if we agree on something pre-game, all of a sudden when we get out in the field and you don't do it, well, it's much easier for me to be able to sell that decision. Okay? So I guess, what do you guys say to front rowers in the pre-match? Who wants to volunteer? Who treat me as your front rower? Who wants to give me their pre-match spiel?
No one.
I'll start picking someone.
Hold it, mate.
Yep.
Okay, fellas, I just want to talk about the scrum. So what I'm going to do is, at the beginning of the scrum, I'm going to make a mark. I want you, the hooker. Who's the hookers? Right, hookers, listening. I want you guys to make sure that you're standing to the left of that. I'll ask the other side to do the same. That'll get your engagement good. Once we're there, I want stability before I make my 3 calls on every set of the plays. So I'm going to ask you to crouch. I want you to be stable. I'm going to ask you to bind. I want good binds. I want you to be stable. Then I'm going to ask you to set, and I need to see it. Hookers this year, for pre-season, I've been reminding them that this year they have to strike the ball on their own feed so that I can then go straight to dealing with it in the field of play if I need to later. And then I basically ask them if they've got any questions, and then I'm done.
Cool. Yep. Like that. Good approach. Anybody else? Richard.
Yo.
Can I borrow? Sorry, 2 secs, mate. This is forceful and
We're discussing scrums at this.
Good. Can you just give me your pre-match for the front rows?
Absolutely. So my front rows, I've obviously called front rows in. Front rows are sometimes the old player is playing still in the development side. I say, okay guys, you all know what it is today. 3 calls, 3 actions. When you're still and steady, I will move on to the next call. Everybody nods, says yes usually, and then you go, and today the one thing we're going to be all working really hard on today is maintaining a gap that we are all happy with. Any questions? And that's my front row briefing.
Cool, thank you. So, contrast that, I'll give you my one because I'm going to refer to it back later on. Guys, 3 things from me. First is stability at every phase. Comfortable? Yeah. Second is 3 separate calls from me, 3 separate reactions from you guys. And the third one is stay in your own space. Any questions? No, sir. No questions. Let me out of here. Okay? So, I think of all of those 3, everything that's said is valid. Right? Everything that's said is the kind of stuff you should be talking to front rows. Richard, and possibly mine as well, you notice quite brief. Right? And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why I don't go through a shopping list of all the things that I want them to do. Can anybody think of what that is?
I've already switched off after your second sentence.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, that's a big part of
From
it.
a
Yeah.
coaching perspective, as a coach, I don't want you to tell my front rows how to scrummage. I've taught them how to scrummage, and I don't need you to give them a lecture. So all I want is to know how you're going to do it, and you're going to get on with it. That's it.
And that's valid.
Also, Mark.
I'll throw it back and say, for me personally, that's probably not part of it, because I challenge whether every coach has taught their front rows how to scrummage well. But that's valid.
There's the corner. Go stand to it, Marcus. If you have a shopping list.
Exactly. So, what happens when you give guys a shopping list of everything they could possibly do or not do at scrum time, is that inevitably there will be a point in the game, and sometimes it'll be early, and they won't do it, right? And all of a sudden you've backed yourself into a corner, like Richard says, because you've expressly said to them at the start of the game, this is what I want you to do. So when they don't do it, they themselves, but more importantly their opposite number, are thinking, well, he's going to do something about it, because we agreed at the start of the game that that's what was going to happen. So if you give a shopping list of things, you back yourself into a corner. Now in saying that, think about the opposite. If you don't give them a shopping list of things, you haven't lost anything, right? If I don't talk to you about a bind, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden when you don't bind properly I can't pull you up on it. I'm still entitled to do that. But I've just highlighted to you the key things that I want you to do, and realistically for me as a referee, it's going to be the things that I want to fall back on later in the game. So I'll talk about this later on, but if I talk to you guys about staying in your own space, so what happens on Saturday? Crouch, bind, boom, pre-engage. Guys, come up. Spoke about it pre-game. Need to have a gap. Stay in your own space, please. Yep, sorry, we did too. Yep, fair enough. And we go again. Crouch, bind, pre-engage, free kick. Why? Because I've told you twice. Okay, we agreed on it pre-game. You recognise that when I stopped and I told you about it. So you got no excuses now. You know exactly what it was for. And that's pretty easy to sell. Does that make sense?
I think when we look back to the reason that we initially started having pre-matches, it's the safety angle. So that's what you're doing with your stability and your gaps, etc. You're enforcing the safety standards.
Yep.
Not coaching the players and all the other peripheral stuff.
Yep. Yeah, of course. Of course. But then I think, also like Nev says, I'm not a front row coach, right? I'm not there to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing, and actually I'm not qualified to tell you about the most effective way to scrummage. I'm just telling you about what I require from you so that I can get positive scrum outcomes, and that's all I care about. So, I think the pre-match, the big learning, if we talk about setting up for success, which is what this was called, think about what role your pre-match plays. And I challenge you guys, go home and stand in front of a mirror or talk to your wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, and when you're going through what your pre-match is, just challenge how much of that is actually necessary. And am I actually going to insist on that happening in a game? So if I spend time talking about, where their feet are or whatever, and you might say, I want hookers, I want you left of the mark, that's fine, that's a valid instruction to give, and I know some of the top guys say that. But if they don't do that, are you going to pull them up on it? And if the answer is no, then query why you're even having that conversation with them in the first place. Would be my advice.
Can I just ask one more thing?
Yeah.
When you call them in to do your preamble, actually look at the players and actually engage with them.
Yeah.
Because some of them will wander in and be looking around. At that point, I'll go, are you with us? And they'll actually stop and go, oh yeah, I'm actually here.
Yeah.
They're just not focused at all. They'll come in and just stand there and go, oh, you're just going to go through the same old crap.
Yeah.
And if you look at them and actually make sure they're actually all engaged with you, you'll get better results.
Couldn't agree more. Nev, and it's such a good point. So I always make an effort. The first thing I'll say to front rowers will have nothing to do about scrums, right? Might not even have anything to do about rugby. Just actually engage with them at a personal level. Granted, much easier at Premier level when you might have had them, X amount of times before and you've actually got relationships with a few of those guys. But hey, that doesn't mean you can't make chit chat before you launch into your pre-match, right? It can be anything. It can be, it could be pissing down with rain. You might say, all right, a few scrums today, boys. Okay, we're likely to have a few, or whatever. Where's your other front row, or how you going, or whatever it is. So I think that's a really valid point, because if you just start rambling scrum speak at them, they're going to tune off. And look, sometimes they might tune off regardless, but like I say, if that happens, then use the scrum for your benefit. The pre-match for your benefit. So setup. So this is, I guess, what people typically think of when they think of your key parts of your scrum. It's your crouch, bind, set. Like I say, everything from the moment the ball gets knocked on through to you say set. And so worth just spending a bit of time thinking about the kind of things that we're looking for at each phase. So something that can be really useful that I know a number of guys do is to have a bit of a checklist that they go through. The kind of things that they're looking for at each phase of that process. So on your crouch or even pre-crouch, a few things you can be looking at. One of them might be your distance, seeing how far away the teams are, seeing their alignment, making sure they're straight and square. Making sure they're all good to go before you say crouch. Set up, feet, things like that. More something to bear in mind. And then on the crouch, you're going to be looking at their body positioning. Okay, so the alignment's also important at that stage, making sure that they're square, both in terms of lighting up square with their opposite number, but also that they're square as a front row, so that they're not setting up on an angle. You're going to be looking at distance. You're going to be making sure that their shoulders are above their hips, so that they've actually got height, because if they're not and their shoulders going like that, it's pretty easy to see what's going to happen on that set. On the bind, part of you is going to make sure that the bind is correct. So obviously you can bind on the back or side, making sure that they get a good long bind, making sure they're not pre-engaged is really important. So the example I was giving before, guys come together, pre-engaged, let's stand them up, let's do it again. Stability, obviously important at each of those phases as well, and particularly on the set. So when you call set, making sure that they haven't, what we say, started going to work, make sure that they're actually set and they're stable before the ball comes in. A little bit harder this year, obviously, because you don't have as much control over when that ball goes in. It's kind of been handed back over to the halfback, but still really important. And I would say if you're doing your job in terms of making sure they're stable at each phase, then by the time it comes to set, there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be nice and stable then, so that it doesn't actually matter when the halfback chooses to put the ball in. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I know you meant it's a tough one, because it's, like you say, especially depending on the level, it can be pretty hard to try and get compliance with a gap. All I would say on that is that the official position is we must have a gap at scrum time. Okay, so I think often it's very easy for guys to try and opt out, particularly early on, and it can be even easier to opt out when it appears as if the scrum is stable despite not having a gap, but actually in a lot of instances you might be making your life a lot harder down the track. So look, to answer your question, personally I spend a lot of time trying to make sure we have a gap early on, and if there isn't compliance, I know there's a spectrum of guys and how they deal with that. I'd probably be down the harder end. But I understand that in certain games, it might be hard to get compliance. And, I can't speak for how other guys deal with it, but I know that a gap is one of those non-negotiables, particularly if you've spoken about it pre-game, is my personal philosophy on it.
What sort of gap are you looking for? Shoulder?
So for me, one of the things I say to players, and I'm not sure if this is official party line, but for me, something needs to happen on the set.
Yeah.
Okay, there's got to be some gap so that when I call set, something's actually happening. Because look, you can go the other way. If your gap's too big, then that's going to have problems on the set as well, and guys are going to go around. And you'll see that in some of the clips we look at later on. But for me, I think it's you've got to ask yourself. You've said to them, or you might have said to them, we want stability at every phase. And so the answer to that is, well, if on the bind and the set you don't have stability, then that's a pretty good indication that either the gap isn't big enough, or they're closing it, or they're not stable. Because that's the rationale for it. Is that if you say bind and they're pre-engaging, they're clearly not stable. They're not supporting their own body weight. So by the time the ball comes in, you're going to have all kinds of issues.
I think that a lot of like schoolboy guys, and they have great difficulty with that. Yeah. Because they naturally just want to follow in. They're not sort of looking for the hit and things like that. They just want to fold in. So trying to enforce it is sometimes.
I think the only thing, and I completely understand what you're saying, because we've all had games where teams will just not give you compliance on the gap. I think the short point is I'd challenge you guys to think about the gap a little bit differently. Don't think about it as something that's necessary to get a contest at the scrum. The gap's actually a safety thing as well, particularly at that level. And it's the same point I'm making, is that if you can't hold a gap, how are you going to be able to hold your weight in the scrum or be in a safe position if you can't even hold your weight before the scrum's even started? So I know what you're saying. It is a tough area of the scrum, but to the extent you can, it's a pretty important area to get compliance. And I guarantee you, if you can get compliance on the gap, you will have cleaner scrums once they've come together. And let's remember, this is the rationale behind this: is setting up for success. So if you watch the guys at the top, or even watch a good referee do a schoolboy game, if they can get compliance on the gap, I guarantee you their scrums will be much easier in the long run. Because often when you find out you've got problems at scrum time, it's too late to solve them. So the amount of times when you have games and scrums go south at 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes, it's too late then. Because you can't set your standards after 60 minutes. It's too late. So invest some time in your first scrum to set your standards, and the plan is, and I know it doesn't always go this way, the plan is you'll reap the rewards later on. So decision making. And I guess this is one of the things where a presentation like this, when we have a look at some videos later on, can really add value. Because if we're making sure that the decisions we're coming to and the pictures we're seeing, if we're consistent in the pictures we're seeing, then it means the outcomes we get at scrum time are better as an association. Okay, so particularly, and bear this in mind when we're going through the AR support, if your decision making is good, your pictures are good, then it means you can add far more value as an AR. Now that doesn't necessarily mean having to come in with live calls, but it can just be the discussions you have with the referee at downtime around decision making. And so, like I'll give you an example. I was ARing on Friday night, and I'd say the majority of the conversations that I was having with the referee in that game was around scrums, and just talking about the pictures we were seeing, the picture he was seeing, what I was seeing on my side. And there was a situation where our pictures were aligned, and if you're seeing the same pictures, it makes it far easier. Okay, so sorry for those who, when I say pictures, that's just kind of what I mean is the thing that happens, right? So if you're seeing the same, so it might be somebody dropping their bind, right? If you're both seeing somebody dropping their bind rather than, the prop bailing out and going to ground, then that improves accuracy and it improves outcomes. Because there's nothing worse, as you all know, as coaches or players, than a referee who doesn't know, what he's even looking for at scrum time and just goes around blowing penalties and guessing. Because it's a tough area of the game, so it can happen. So how do we make decisions that everyone can understand? I think it's the point I was going back to at the start. If we're clear in what we're asking for front rowers and we're clear in our standards, then that makes it far easier for us to make decisions that people understand. If I've stood up a team for closing the gap, they may not have seen that interaction pre-game, but if I've stood up a team for closing the gap, then I free kick them, might be another free kick, penalise them, that's easy for people to understand. They know what the issue is. Similarly, if your communication's good, so it's another thing we'll think about. If your communication's good, that makes for decisions that are easy to understand. And it doesn't have to be complex, right? So you'll see in some of these examples that we'll go through, very succinct communication. Any questions on that?
When you have dominant scrums, sometimes it can look that the team, you can see the dominance, sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
How do you kind of determine, what do you look for?
Yeah. So I think it's a really good question. So we spoke before around, in one of the, the philosophies that you'll hear guys talk about, particularly at scrum time, is around rewarding dominance. And I think it's really important just to promote good scrummaging and also to get good outcomes that we make sure we are rewarding dominance. But that naturally begs the question, well, what does dominance look like? Sometimes it's very easy to see when a team's dominant, but you might not be able to put your finger on why. So for me, if I think about what a dominant scrum looks like, I think of front rowers who are staying straight and staying square. I think of front rowers where the weight is forward rather than to the side, so they're not angling in on an angle. They're staying low, staying straight, and they're driving through. Now sometimes that wheels as a result, but if the first movement is forward, that to me suggests dominance. So one of the things we'll see when we go through the videos is the difference between a team wheeling the scrum or deliberately wheeling the scrum versus a team who is dominant at scrum time goes forward and the scrum then wheels as a result. So for me, going forward is a sign of dominance. Being able to stay in the contest as well. So often a number of these penalties, and like I say, we'll see them later on, you'll see front rowers just pull out of the contest. So by that I mean the pressure will come on, they'll decide no, can't hack this, and they'll drop their bind or they'll cave in or they might stand up under pressure. So like that's an easy penalty for us to sell in terms of dominance. So if you watch Super Rugby, you see a scrum that stays low, stays straight, stays square, goes forward. What you'll often see happen is what my hand's doing. This team will cave, somebody's head will pop up, and that's a clear dominant picture. Okay? If somebody pops up, that's as a result of the other team's dominance. Now again, contrast that with a team that's deliberately driving up. That isn't dominance, that's them not staying in the contest. This will become a lot clearer later on. It's just the nature of this presentation is that the videos come at the end. Just finally, AR support. So when should ARs add support and how should it be communicated? Let's just assume at the start that your decision making is good, your setup's good, or the referee's got a good setup. How can you as an AR add value? Part of it depends on where you are. So I know for me, if I'm giving instructions to my ARs, it's that I want the far side AR, if I'm at one side of the tunnel and there's an AR at the other side, I want them to be at the tunnel. So that we've both got a pair of eyes on each side of the scrum. Now that helps in a number of ways. One, it helps me when I'm engaging with front rows to be able, and often if I say to an AR, if Smudge is the AR and he's on that side, and I say to him, Smudge, can you watch this side for me?
Absolutely.
Thanks, mate. Now I'm commed up, right? well, I'm lucky enough that sometimes I'm wearing comms gear. I don't need to say it that loud. I could just come through to smudge quietly. But what that does to the front rowers is they go, crap, okay, smudge is watching on that far side, so I've got to be on my best behaviour. Because the temptation for a lot of front rowers, and you'll get it at you know, all levels, and I still get it if I don't have ARs, it's always the far side with their issues, right? Because the referee's not there, and they decide that's when they're going to go to work, and they're going to try something sneaky. So if you're an AR, you can really add value by being on that opposite side, even just for appearance, even just because it looks like there's somebody on the other side who's watching out. The second way that you can add value is, I guess, the more substantive way, which is the pictures that you see as an AR on the other side. To this end, I'd say downtime's really useful, and by that I mean if a scrum goes to ground, your downtime is the time in between that happening and the referee setting up the next scrum. And downtime is a perfect opportunity, if you've got comms gear on, to come through to the referee and feed through what you're seeing. Because if you come through with a live call, i.e. a scrum goes down and you say, blue, 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 and they penalise that team, there's no going back from that. You've got to be absolutely crystal clear on what you're seeing if you're going to feed a penalty call through to the referee. Because if he goes with you and he backs you, well, you've given him a call and he's hung his hat on it. So what I would say, and particularly if you're starting out as an AR, or not even that, if you're just wanting to provide value and do it in a way that I guess doesn't back you into a corner as much, downtime's really useful. So if you have a scrum go down, I might be on the far side. I might say, Smudge, just have a word to 3 blue about height. Right? Smudge might go over and say, 3, stay up, head and shoulders above your hips. They'll go, yep, sweet. Or, Smudge, both front rowers have a word about binding. Now that's really useful because you're telling the referee what he needs to keep an eye out for in the future. So that's a real way that ARs can add value. Does that make sense? Cool. How should it be communicated? I guess I kind of did that tacitly without even thinking about it. But short, sharp communication. The referee doesn't have a chance to hear a 1-minute spiel on everything that's going on in the scrum, but if you can add value in a couple of short moments, tell him what he needs to be looking out for, that's gold. So have a look at binding, or watch the angle, or watch blue coming in on an angle, or whatever it is. Short, sharp, to the point is how it should be communicated. And if you're giving a live call, again, the warning on that is you've got to be 100% sure, but if you are 100% sure and you're giving a live call, general rule of thumb, and I'm loath to speak on behalf of other people, but general rule of thumb is you come through with the colour of the team that you're penalising. So if I'm, and that's the message I give to my ARs, come through with the colour of the team you're penalising. If I hear blue, 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 it's a penalty to red. And in the time between me awarding that penalty to red, that's the opportunity for you to come through and tell me what for. So you might go blue, 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 I give a penalty to red, and then you say, number 3, collapsing. And that gives me a chance, as I'm sitting there, to go 3, collapsing. All good? So now this will become much, much clearer when we have some clips. And rest assured this won't take too long. I kind of query this. New Zealand rugby teams are generally positive. I think in Auckland, this is probably of no consolation to you guys, but my experience, generally speaking, is that we get good tests at scrum time up in Auckland. Read into that what you will, but I think we have a tough job up here sometimes with the gap in ability of scrummaging teams. Treat that as a positive. We learn how to manage scrums better than any other association. Okay. So we spoke about stability. It was one of the big things I spoke about in my pre-match, and that Richard spoke about in his pre-match. We've said that teams must be stable. So let's have a look at this clip. So pretty clear what we're seeing there. And I think if you can hear the clip, you can even hear Marius say, I think his justification is going to work early, or going to work before the ball's in. So we've said to teams, on the set, I want you to be stable. So he's gone set here. So we want stability from this point onwards until the ball's in.
Marcus, just going back to the issue of gap,
Yeah.
would you be comfortable with that level of gap before the set? Because it seemed quite close, but
Probably not, but I'll watch it again. I think look, again, not always helpful, but one of the things we'll bear in mind, and Smudge, you can echo this for me, Super Rugby isn't always our best example of some of the smaller things, and that's just the reality. And you can say why not? It should be, whatever. Super Rugby is an entertainment package. Okay, that's the reality of it. There are some things that they're really tough on. Some things that they have decided as a competition they are more willing to I guess play away from. So I can watch it again if you want. Yeah, I'd be happy with that gap actually. Yeah, I would. So remember I spoke before about how I want something to happen on the set. For me, there's enough of a gap there. So, like I say, good example. Player's clearly going to work before the ball's in. This one here, tight head must bind legally. So, just so we're clear, the tight head is that blue player. So let's watch the blue player.
Yeah, he's lost his bind.
And this is one of the only clips, I think it's the only clip in the PowerPoint presentation where I'm going to say ignore the outcome. So, Andrew Lee's on that far side. He hasn't got a great view of what's going on that far side. Okay? So he's reset. He resets the scrum and says, I want to set again. What you'll clearly see, if we watch it through again, and the thing that Scott Hardy's blowing up about, is if you watch that blue player, he's binding on that arm of the yellow player. So all of a sudden he's brought his bind back, he's putting pressure on the forearm of that yellow player, and naturally that forces the yellow player to come to ground. Okay, so look, these clips have been used for a reason, pretty clear. That is an example of the tight head prop not binding legally. That would be a penalty to yellow. Is that clear to everyone?
Yeah.
So you see here he's on the arm, and he pulls him in. And like I say, unfortunate for the referee, he just happens to be on the wrong side. Similarly, the loose head must bind legally, so we want a nice long bind from the loose head. Okay? And we rely on him to try and keep the scrum up. So here, again, the loose head is the Highlanders player.
Drops it.
And boom, he loses his bind. Now, it's easy, and particularly at community level, you might say, look, that's unfortunate, he's lost his bind, I might have another crack, and we might reset that. I could probably live with that. You know, particularly like you say, if you've got front rowers who aren't great or don't really know how to scrummage, you could live with having a reset. Super Rugby level, he's just come under pressure. Okay, he can't hack the hit, he can't hack the pressure, so he drops his bind as a result. Talk about rewarding dominance. That line's tight head is dominant. Okay? And you can't, as a loose head, just pull out of that contest because the heat comes on.
It looked like quite a short bind.
Yeah, so he's allowed a short bind.
Yeah, but if he changes between short and long, is it his prerogative to keep it up?
And he's got to keep his bind up.
Yeah.
However he does it and however long he binds. Now, you know, we're clear on what the law is. The law requires you to bind on the back or side. It doesn't say we have a long bind, you must have a long bind. We often ask for that because we want that because it's more likely to keep the scrum up. But they can bind short. The counter to that is they've just got to keep it up.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that. Teams must push straight. Okay, so if you want to see what a poor example of this is, watch the scrum.
Offside.
So that's wheeling. And it's a penalty of the Hurricanes. So Paul Williams is the referee. He actually put this presentation together, so he wouldn't have put his own clip in there if he didn't think it was right or had a point to make. But this is a clear example of wheeling the scrum rather than being dominant in the scrum wheeling as a result. So sometimes the trigger for that, if you want to know, well, what's the difference? How do I look? What do I look for? Good trigger can be if you watch the second rowers. Okay, so you watch the locks. All of a sudden, if they start wheeling, that says to me that the props haven't, the front rowers haven't got dominance. You're just trying to wheel it, and the second rowers can have a pretty good impact at wheeling that scrum. So if we watch it again, we watch the force. Ask yourself when it starts going forward, or if the force start going forward.
Doesn't.
No, they don't. It's pretty square, and then all of a sudden they start wheeling.
So how do you know that's not the prop on this side of the Hurricanes not pushing straight?
Because to me, I'm watching the players other than the front rowers at that point. So because I'm seeing all the movement coming from the guys at the back, that suggests to me that it's not a case of the prop having a one up on his opposite man. And look, the simplest thing I'd say to look at, just wait and see if that scrum goes forward first, and you'll see a good example later on of where the scrum goes forward and then wheels. Might be here actually. Yeah, this is the dominant picture.
Oh yeah.
Can everybody see what the difference between those two is?
Yeah.
So, just to make it really obvious, this is where the scrum is at the set. Ball comes in. If we stop there, Highlanders are dominant, right? They've got their walk on, starting to march the Hurricanes back, and then as a result, it turns. And as a general rule of thumb, if one forward pack ends up over on top of the other ones on the ground, that's a pretty good sign that they've got dominance. This is one tight head, so watch the Bulls tight head, the blue tight head. Nah, had enough. Pressure comes on, he's overextended his legs. So by that I mean, if he starts like this, naturally when you engage, your legs go back. I can't do it because I'm going to hold myself up because I've got no core strength. But the legs go back, and if you overextend, the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to go straight to ground. Okay, so if I'm your opposite number and I'm staying in a good position and you've overextended your legs and go straight to ground, that to me says that you haven't got yourself in a position where you can be rewarded. So I guess the opposite of rewarding dominance is penalising negativity, and I'd say that's a pretty negative picture. I need to watch it again. But here's the opposite. Here's the loose head collapsing. We'll leave this because we need to see the reverse angle. So it's actually this player here, the white loose head that we're watching. So like I say, just wait for the reverse angle. It's a penalty to yellow. Jacko said that loose head going straight down. So as a general rule, what we expect to see from that signal is his head and shoulders are going below his hips because he's pulled out of the contest. So let's see on the reverse angle if Jacko's correct.
Yeah.
So we can already see there, head and shoulders below his hips, he's gone to ground. Those pictures clear? Yep. Now, look, I know they're not always going to be that clear. It's very easy when you get to cherry pick the ones you want to put in a PowerPoint presentation, and sometimes we might see pictures on a Saturday and we go, I've got no idea what happened there. Don't guess. Okay, it's a good way to lose credibility if you start guessing. But if you can think about the kind of things you're looking for, that means the amount of times you have to guess will be a lot less. So that's all from me. If you have any questions about Scrums or anything, I'm happy to talk Scrums all night long. Come up and ask me. I don't profess to have all the answers, and I still have people that I go to try and learn more about Scrums, but always happy to have a chat, and hopefully between us we can come up with an answer. So yeah, that's all. Thanks guys.